To launch the Christian Research Association's new book, Life, Ethics and Faith in Australian Society, written by the Revd Dr. Philip Hughes and Lachlan Fraser, a public address was delivered by John Lenders, Labor leader in the Victorian Legislative Council and MP for the Southern Metropolitan Region, who spoke at length on the topic of the role of faith in public policy. Dr. Philip Hughes also spoke about the facts and figures in his most recent books and what it tells us about Australian society.
Looking at the book overall, it seems to me that religion contributes that people-centred approach. It emphasises again and again the importance of people and the well-being of people, and encourages a valuing of people rather than productivity or wealth. Are there new implications of pivotal religious principles such as the value of the human being for new issues today? The sorts of issues the government is seeking to make decisions about. My sense is that the message of the book is that religions will continue to will contribute to contemporary society as they re-emphasise the value of human life and the well-being of humanity in an age which sometimes, at least, is dominated by considerations of economic productivity.
John Lenders began his speech by making reference to the ABC Compass programs on the religious beliefs of Australian Prime Ministers before moving to a general talk on the discussion of faith in public policy.
I mean, the first observation was it said that all Australian Prime Ministers professed to be Christians other than Gough Whitlam and Julia Gillard, who said they were agnostics but came from a Christian faith tradition in their early lives. Bob Hawke actually was a third, which I missed. They had really sort of the first almost big sectarian debate in Australia over an issue that in many ways started by an interpretation of should you support or oppose conscription on the basis of Christian values or values, depending on how you wish to describe it. So it's an interesting starting point as to how values start underpinning decisions of government.
Look, I think from a religious perspective, many of the secular values are exactly the same. I mean, I use the example in the speech of Ben Chifley's Light on the Hill being not dissimilar to the Sermon on the Mount. And I think that that's a good example in many ways of it. You know, it's an aspirational thing as to what people should be doing. You know, there's a values thing that, you know, these are good people who do these things. These are good things to do. Then what the good is, you know, whether there is a religious foundation to the good, which I believe there is, or whether it is just intrinsically these things are good things to do. Now, I think the two have in many ways become blurred, that things that are deemed to be good, people deem them to be good because they're good, not without necessarily thinking that they have a religious background to where they've come from. And I think that the Sermon on the Mount and the Light on the Hill in many ways best symbolise that you know, both of them are calls for people to rise to better things, because that's the right thing to do.
And it's interesting, according to the Compass program, and when you actually reflect on it, the Light on the Hill is actually very much based on the Sermon on the Mount. And it's interesting, again, it goes to a central thing, you know, where do values come from? And I guess increasingly I'll come to the observation here, people in government respond to things almost without identifying a value underpinning it. And that seems to be the feature of so much of what my observations from being involved in government at a number of levels would be. But when you try to identify, well, what was our response to the global financial crisis? The first discussion we would have is you need to protect the financial system so you can keep jobs. So there becomes a whole issue here, well, what is the virtue of keeping jobs? Is an underpinning of the dignity that goes with it, the respect for humans, the ability of society to do things if people are in meaningful, well-paid employment.
Reverend Philip Hughes showed how faith can impact on the decisions that we make in life.
So those who attend religious services monthly or more often, they're 300% more likely to be married by the age of 25, particularly if they're Jehovah's Witnesses, Muslims, Hindus, Latter-day Saints, Pentecostals, Baptists or Churches of Christ, compared with those who do not attend religious services. They're 37% less likely to ever experience divorce. if you are Seventh-day Adventist, Churches of Christ, Baha'i, Salvation Army, Pentecostal or Baptist, you're at least 30% more likely to work in education, health or welfare than if you have no religion. We actually did some work some years ago where we traced people's religious faith at different points in life. So we looked at people in terms of their faith journey and when they exited from church or didn't or maintained their involvement. And what we found was that the churches were encouraging people into education, health or welfare type occupations. Those who didn't want to go into those occupations tended to drop out of the churches at a much greater rate than if they went into those sorts of occupations. And in fact, if you work in those areas, you are twice as likely to attend religious services than if you work in construction or trades.
Now I'll move now on to some observations about the state and state government here. And again, on the issue of the role of religion, I mean, stating the obvious, we are a secular society. However, our head of state is also the head of the Church of England. Our Parliament commences with the Lord's Prayer. But it's interesting when you actually watch when people get sworn in, a majority of our MPs in Victoria still swear on the Bible or in some case the Torah or the Quran, but a majority still choose to swear on a holy book rather than take an affirmation. So there is still a majority who, for whatever reason, feel that is important. So the starting point is we are a secular state, and part of that permeates through. People are saying, well, if we're a secular state, we've got to leave our religious beliefs at the door. But this is where I guess the premise I make is, well, how can you do that when that is part of what you are? And secondly, they have permeated so much of what we see as now the secular humanist culture has so much of its strengths come out of the Christian and Jewish traditions in particular.
And if you attend religious services weekly, you are 45% more likely to undertake voluntary work than if you never attend such services. The religious services play a very significant role in terms of the voluntary sector. Higher sense of levels of meaning. 85% of attenders say life has a purpose, compared with 77% of non-attenders. Higher levels of satisfaction in life. 48% of attenders say they're very happy with life, compared with just 30% of people who don't attend religious services. A very significant difference.
How do I as an MP engage with 446,338 people? And the answer is obviously with great difficulty. Few people seek to meet them. And yet there's a lot of values issues, and a lot of the debate on religion in politics and faith goes to issues which we have had conscience votes on in the Victorian Parliament. There's been the issue of abortion, euthanasia and stem cell research have been three. And they're quite different in many ways because the Labor Party, the Liberal Party and the National Party have given their members conscience votes on those. It's a lot more, I guess, willing in a sense, where citizens then say, well, we have a view on this, the Member of Parliament is open to our view, let's talk to them. But if you talk of those three issues, the issue of the abortion reform bill in 2008, I had contact from 413 of my electors. So I had contact by less than 1 in 1,000.
Oh, firstly, the views of the electorate are disparate. I mean, my electorate has, probably about 90 to 95% of Victoria's Jewish community in it. So that for example, is a faith community that is fairly unique to my electorate. So I obviously pay more cognizance there than most other MPs would because they are my constituents. When I was a member in North Dandenong, I had a reasonably large Islamic representation in my electorate and a very large Buddhist one. So, wherever we go, but I think there is a growing percentage of the population who do not want their lawmakers to actually hold a religious perspective to it. I mean, their view is this is a secular society and you should be representing everybody's interests. Now, intellectually, I don't think anyone would dispute that, but in practice, how do you determine what is the right thing to do when your own belief systems come into being there? So the electorate expect you to look at at the whole and act in a community's interest. But that's a very vague and difficult thing to interpret without your own belief system.
When I was first elected the member for Dandenong North, not far from here, I tried to go out to every single school in my electorate as a starting point. Getting into St Gerard's, a Catholic parish, was as a Catholic, mind you, with a Dutch priest and me being of a Dutch background, was quite a Herculean task. Sometimes you can't even get in if you try. Others are very welcome to have you coming in. The parish priest there was suspicious I was a communist because I was in the Labor Party. So one side is sometimes you try to reach out, people will actually not engage you at all. I would think that as a member of Parliament, your job is to do a few things. I mean, you need to carry out, you need to have values that underpin what you're doing. You need to carry out what you promised at an election. You need to respond to new and emerging issues. I mean, there's a range of things you do. And the bushfires, as an example before, was a classic. You need to understand your community. You've got those proactive citizens that come to you, and you've also, you've got to reach out to passive citizens.
In the end, I mean, there are certain things that I would say from our secular culture have come out of the religious traditions. And, whether you're talking of Christianity, Judaism, Islam, I don't pretend to know enough about Buddhism or Hinduism to talk of it. But of those three monotheistic religions, all of them, have a firm belief that there is a great importance in charity, in generosity and looking after the weak. They're tenets of all the three great monotheistic religions.
Michael Rodden, Anglican Media, Melbourne.